I'm Jack Oswald, and you're listening.
This is Hudson Hamlin, and you're listening to...
I'm Richard C. Hoagland, and you're listening to...
I'm Art Bell, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Welcome back to the second hour of Dr. J Radio Live. I'm your host, Dr. J, broadcasting from the City of Angels. Let me make one quick comment real quick. Now that I was listening to my promo and opening, I got to say this. This is something that I just realized now. Art Bell made that promo for me. There is not a single other show he's made that for, not even his very own Midnight in the Desert. So that's kind of cool. I guess it's kind of cool to reflect on that. Anyhow, as you know, we are celebrating Halloween today, and we are in the middle of the week, so happy Wednesday to you. We just finished with Dr. Barry Taff, and now we're going to move on to our next subject. And let me remind you, folks, that we are internationally syndicated with Late Night in the Midlands in the U.S., as well as deprogram radio in the United Kingdom and EU. We are shifting gears now to demonology, and unfortunately, we only have an hour, or a little bit less, and actually do have a full hour. But I do know for a fact, since we talked before the show, that I'm definitely going to have to bring this guest back because of the topics that he's talking about. And I know 1 hour is not going to be nearly enough, so you're all going to get a tease for what's going to come when his next book is coming out. So without further ado, if you've seen the promotions, then you know exactly who I'm about to introduce. If you haven't, well, let me introduce him now, Mr. Bill Bean. Bill, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Dr. J. It's an honor and a pleasure to be on with you.
It's an honor and pleasure to finally speak to you on the airwaves. And as we were talking before the show, we were both talking about how we ended up in life. And I was talking about, well, if things were going to plan, I should be practicing law and defending criminals and suing people who get in car accidents. But of course, I ended up here, which ironically, for those people out there who haven't heard the whole story, which you could hear, I never even asked for this. This just sort of fell in my lap. And something similar happened to you in your life. If it wasn't for what happened in your life, God wouldn't have guided you to become who you are today. So I guess the best question is to talk about what happened in your early life that led you to study demonology and poltergeists and other events.
Well, you're absolutely right. And you know, this is something that I didn't choose. It's something that I didn't study. This is something that God put on me, a calling. And I've suffered greatly in life. And my family was destroyed by demonic forces, and I was nearly destroyed as well. And I've written 4 books, actually 5 now. My 5th will be coming out next month, which is called Stranger Than Fiction. And in the first book, which is called Dark Force, I talk about the events that took place between 1970 and 1980. Now, I say that it began there, but honestly, it goes much further back than that. And I didn't realize it until after I had written Dark Force, when I had a really deep discussion with a relative. It's difficult to talk about, Dr. J. Let me tell you, when people suffer real trauma, it's not so easy for people to open up and talk about these things. You know, people, including myself back then, you know, you just try and bury it. And it's unfortunate that when these types of things happen, and if it involves really high levels of trauma, you know, and a lot of my clients today have suffered trauma such as sexual abuse or child molestation, things of that nature. So, you know, these are horrific traumas. And they don't just go away. And it requires someone like me to come along, God working through me, because it's not my power, it's not me at all. I'm just the shell in the vessel that God works through to help people. But it does require someone like me to come along with the power of God working through me to bind and rebuke and cast out those demonic forces that literally attach to the victim. So the perpetrator is already demon-filled to, you know, in order to commit such wicked and heinous acts right off the bat. But unfortunately, when those high level of traumas take place, well, then the demons attach to the victim as well, because they are drawn to fear, and they're also drawn to the excretions that come out of the pineal gland and other glands that, you know, it's adrenochrome. They are absolutely drawn to that. They eat it up like candy. And so in my case, I was 4 years old when we moved into this house, and the house was located at the bottom of a downhill cul-de-sac in a town called Glen Burnie in a community called Herondale. And I recall at the age of 4 just being frightened at the sight of this place. And the home was semi-dilapidated. My dad, William Bean Sr., was a master carpenter, and he saw it as a restoration project, which he did quite a bit of work to it in restoring it and making it to look nice. But I just knew from the beginning. And my sister, Patty, I was 4, she was 13 at the time. And she had a similar feeling, just this awful, awful feeling, this frightened feeling and not knowing why. But the house just had a very ominous look and feel about it, and equally as well on the inside. So you would walk in through the front door, and it was very dark. Upon entering into the house, you'd walk in through the front door into the living room, and there was this dark brown paneling on the walls. And so it was very, very dark in there. It was almost black, the paneling, it was that dark. And even on the brightest of days, it was always dark in the house. And, certainly I know now as a deliverance minister and an exorcist and a warrior for God, I know that there are atmospheric changes when demons are present. And I certainly didn't know it back then, but could feel it. And you could feel the heaviness in the air, and and there were times that just awful smells would just manifest out of nowhere, smells of sulfur or like rotten meat or something like that. It was just terrible. And that went on for, off and on for the entire time that we lived there. But my mom, Patricia Bean, was the first to have an experience in the house. It wasn't long after moving in that she had this to take place, and it happened in the living room. And my dad had taken us with him for the day to allow my mother time by herself without us under her feet bothering her to unpack and organize. And she was doing this in the living room, and she suddenly felt a presence come into the room. And in her mind, she thought that it was most likely my dad sneaking back into the house to play a joke on her. He had that type of sense of humor. And so she spun around fully anticipating on seeing him, and to her shock, nothing was there. And so as you can imagine, she was frightened, she was taken aback, she was perplexed, all these things. And was eventually able to go back to doing what she was doing. And then one of the bedroom doors slammed shut by itself, and that was enough to make her go outside and wait until we returned. So, again, now I'll try and paint a picture for you here. You're entering through the front door into the living room, and you would make a right down a long hallway, which had a tile floor. It was a hard tile floor, and the hallway had this dark brown paneling on the walls, and my room was the first on the right. I shared it with my brother, Bobby, who was 1 at the time. And my parents' room was the next room down on the right. And my sister was in the room across the hall to the left. And that is the room that I feel was the portal in the main entry and exit point for these entities. And that room was always cold, even on the hottest of summer days. And that is also the room where the door would open and slam for many repetitions at a time. So, again, my mother being the first to have this type of experience in the house. And then I found out through this relative that my mother and her siblings had many paranormal supernatural experiences in their childhood. And they moved around quite a bit as children and actually lived in that very area as teenagers. So I found that to be fascinating and very interesting that she was, had prior exposure to that area before moving back there, with her family. And so it's amazing to note that, she had gone through these types of experiences for, much of her life. And she certainly was the focal point. These events would eventually escalate into violent physical attacks on us from these demonic entities, which greatly contributed to the destruction of my family. And I don't say that lightly at all.
Let me ask you a question. You talked about which sulfur. That's something I hear in recurring theme brought in me, and the different smells, the atmospheric changes, that heaviness in the air, doors closing. Did you actually see anything aside from knowing that this was happening? Because I mean, that would be enough to, like your mother ran out. I would probably have done the same thing. But have you actually seen anything, like any, shadow figures or any aberrations or anything that looked demonic and not human?
Not only did we see these entities, but we were physically attacked by these entities, especially my mother and I, many times over the years. And it got to the point that we were so physically worn down that we were resigned to these things happening. And I say in the first book, Dark Force, that it was as if we were like prisoners in a POW camp. We came to expect this, and we were defeated mentally, spiritually, and physically. So, in the beginning, my parents had gotten together. I believe they were married in 1956, and my sister was born in 1957. And another child was born in 1963 and died shortly thereafter under very mysterious circumstances, and never could get the actual truth as to what took place because there were family members. I have very little family left, by the way. Neither of my parents lived to see 50, and a lot of my family members are gone. But the ones that remain are very reluctant. They either don't recall the full events, or they weren't there, or they don't want to talk about what took place with that child that was born in 1963 and died under mysterious circumstances. What I do know for sure is that representatives of Johns Hopkins Hospital came out and retrieved the body for studies. So that's what I know for sure. That's all I know for sure. And I was born in 1966, and my brother was born in 1969. So moving into the house, by all accounts, my parents were happy for the most part. They were social drinkers, and back in that time frame of the 70s, families got together and had these parties, and, in Maryland, that's a big place for seafood. And so they would have these crab feasts and all this kind of stuff. So there was social drinking involved. But not long after moving into the house, as these events began to happen, my dad's demeanor was drastically changing.
For good reason.
My dad was, he was a great man. Let me tell you, Dr. J, he was a man's man. He was a very tough and rugged individual. And he was used to being in charge and in control of everything, of every situation. And he suddenly found himself in a situation that he couldn't control, and I think that confounded him to the point to where he began to literally try to escape reality through heavy alcohol abuse, and then it became, just a way of life for him to. His story alone is just so sad and tragic, because this is a man that was blessed with greatness. He was blessed with gifts to be highly successful in life at whatever he chose to do. He was that gifted. And for his life to have ended the way it did is just horrible. Sad. And my mom as well. But his demeanor began to change. The further he delved into the bottle, it wasn't long after that he became violent and became a raging, violent alcoholic who was physically abusing my mother on a regular basis between 1973 and 1975, nearly killed her on several occasions. I can recall being 8 years old, having to run to a neighbor's house and get the police call on my dad because he was absolutely killing my mother. So these are horrific memories. I have no doubt that these demonic forces were able to fuel and intensify his rage and anger towards my mother while he was under the influence of alcohol. And I've said it a million times that we and all life operates on frequency and vibration, and the devil knows this. So God started this off by speaking the world into existence. And if in fact Yahweh did speak the world into existence, well, he did it through his voice, through frequency and vibration. So the devil mimics everything that God does, and he puts a vulgar twist on it. And so he can manipulate frequency and vibration when people are under the influence, whether that's alcohol, drugs, whatever it may be. the devil can lower one's frequency and vibration to the point to where that person can be manipulated and altered and do things that they would never do in a million years. And so I really believe that's what was taking place at that point in time. So he ended up leaving us in 1975. And thank God he did leave, because had he stayed, I'm certain that he would have killed my mother. And he left us in such a bad way that it was horrible, Dr. J. My mother had to go on welfare. My mother was very ill, and I failed to mention this, that she was also very ill the entire time we lived in the house. She was suffering from high blood pressure, which led to a series of strokes, which ultimately led to kidney failure. So she was in very poor health. And so after he left, that's when my mother and I really came under regular physical attack from these entities. And she suffered far greater than I. She suffered more than any other person I've ever seen in my life. And also, I should note that my sister had ran away in the middle of the night in 1973, and she had married a young man in the neighborhood. And as you know, and some of the listeners out there may know, that my story was featured on the A Haunting series. And she said in the episode, House of the Dead, on the A Haunting series, she said that she would have married anyone just to get out of there. I mean, she had an experience. She was the first to have physical contact from these entities, and that took place in 1970. And she never again felt comfortable in the house. She always felt watched and followed. And so she was just looking to get out of there, and especially when the domestic abuse began with my father, that was enough to push her over the edge to get out of there, and that's exactly what happened. So she was out of there by 73, and then it was my mother and my younger brother and I, after my dad left us in 1975. So it was difficult, and that's a very light word for what actually took place there. And I was thankful that, number one, I was grateful to Discovery Channel and New Dominion Pictures. Tricia Dozier, who is a producer over there, a good friend of mine, I'm grateful to them to this day, because they are the ones that really put me on the map as far as airing my story, and that led to worldwide exposure. So that's where it all began for me, and then I was thankful to God that I was able to write my book, Dark Force, to tell the truth. And so that is certainly the accurate version to the best of my recollections and other family members as well. So that's where it began. And the first battle with demonic forces that I had took place in July of 1979. I was 13 years old. Now, as I've stated already, my mother and I, and my brother as well, but my brother, his physical contact and being physically attacked was to a lesser degree than my mom and I, for some reason, just like mine was to a lesser degree than what she was going through. And that said, we suffered all of those years, with that, and to the point where we were zombie-like and expecting these things to take place. And on an afternoon in July, right past the 4th of July holiday, my mother was attacked, and there were 4 other adults with her at the time. I was 13. My brother, I believe, was 10, and he was outside playing. So there were 4 adults and myself, 5 adults and myself. And my mother had just been attacked. She had been picked up by an unseen force by the back of her neck and hurled across her room and landed into her makeup table. She was cut open, she was scratched, she was bruised, and all of the years of fear, torment, abuse, and hopelessness, and desperation, and all of these things came to a head on that day. And I grabbed the Bible and a jar of that holy water, and I began to call these things out. Now, where I made my mistake was I should have been binding them and casting them out, but I called them out. And it's worth noting also that during that time frame, the last 16 months that we lived there, we had a Catholic priest involved, and he was a regular visitor to the house, and it got to the point where he was coming and bringing mason jars full of holy water. Now, my family and I are not Catholic, but my step-grandfather was, and he had gone to the church, and they sent Monsignor Auer out there. And I'm grateful to them for that. By no fault of his, he did the best that he could. The activity continued to, intensify against us, and there are various reasons for that. Again, when we live in fear, we are literally feeding these demonic forces. Yeah, and so I didn't know it back then, and certainly we didn't know it, and it's very difficult when you're in something. It's, it's easy for somebody on the outside to say something, but, when you're living it, it's a very, very difficult thing to change the patterns. And so on that day, I was calling these demonic forces out, and I kid you not, it was like a scene from a horror film. The house began to vibrate. Things were falling off the walls. Doors were opening and slamming. Now, I was 13 years old, and I had 5 adults standing there. My mother had just been attacked, so she was already injured and traumatized, but I was enraged. I was not afraid. For the first time in the whole time that I lived in that house, I was not afraid. I was enraged. And so I was calling these things out, and we're going up the hallway, and the adults are standing behind me in the dining room. So I'm standing in the living room. They are standing several feet behind me in the dining room. And just, I would say probably 10 to 12 feet in front of me, these entities did appear in greenish beams of light. It looked like a scene from like Star Trek. They appeared in these greenish beams of light. And the first entity is what we call the Undertaker. It was this sinister-looking thing that had chalky white skin and black hair and a black suit and black eyes. And this is one of 3 entities that were regularly attacking my mother physically and me as well. And also attacked my father, which my father never talked about this. But in the beginning, my father was actually picked up by his neck, his throat, and thrown through the living room closet doors on one night. So, he never talked about that. And that was part of, so really he was probably the first one to suffer a serious attack. But on this day, again, these entities manifested, I would say, probably 10 feet or less right in front of me, and the adults were standing several feet behind me. And so this Undertaker entity was the first, and the second was a red-haired, male-looking entity, same thing, chalky white skin, black eyes, short, like curly, like red hair, had a scar down the left side of its face, and that's another one that was attacking my mother on a regular basis. And then the third entity was a woman that had long, dark hair, black gown, sharp facial features. She looked like a witch. And then the fourth was what we call the Dark Force entity, which was this demonic-looking thing that was a black form that had glowing red eyes. And so we saw them for several seconds, and then they just dissipated. They didn't suddenly vanish. They just dissipated. And as these things were dissipating, all the chaotic things that were taking place in the house stopped, and peace had come back in, and order was restored, but then we quickly left. And at that point in time, it was 1979, my mother had a new man in her life by the name of Richard. And Richard loved my mother very much, but he was terrified to be in that house. And again, Richard was very much like my dad. He was a man's man. He was a former boxer, a very tough individual. And he wasn't afraid of anyone or anything. However, he too was physically attacked in the house by these entities, and he was terrified to be there. So it was only his love for my mother that kept him around. So on that day, after all the chaos had stopped, we had gone over to Richard's house to stay for the night over there. And then eventually, in December of 1980, we ended up moving in with Richard permanently until my mother's death. So the last day that we lived in the house, we woke up to the pungent odor of burning wires. It was horrible. It was a horrible odor. And we woke up and we started going around the house, and we found that every electrical appliance, whether it was washer, dryer, TV sets, refrigerator, whatever it was, they were all burned up. Everything had burned up at the same time. And my mother found one of my brother's pets dead in the cage, and that was another thing. We'd had many dogs over the years that had either gone mad or mysteriously died, or one disappeared. And that was another horrific thing. And I'm not trying to sell a book here, but I guarantee you would want to read this book to just to grasp what I'm saying here. And I'm trying to be brief because we don't have much time, but let me tell you, there was a lot of things that happened. And let me say this, for the listeners, and I've made these offers before and I'll make them again. Do I love selling books? Yeah, that's great. But this is not about selling books. This is about speaking the truth and presenting something to the listener that actually happened. And I'm a walking miracle from God. I can never thank God and praise him enough for everything that he's done in delivering me from that hellish life into a life now to where it works through me to help others to be delivered from stuff like this. So if there's anyone out there that can't afford to get my books, and BillBean.net is where you can get them. If you can't afford to get them, just send me an email, and I'll send you a free PDF copy. And I've made these offers in the past, and I make it again because it's important that people know the truth. So, Dr. J, we could go on and on and on about the events that took place, and I'm really scratching the surface. But when I tell you that I lived a hellish life, and I have seen the worst of the worst things in life, I'm telling the truth.
You weren't kidding, that's for sure. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever worked or know Father Jack Ashcraft?
I know who he is. No, I never worked with him. I know, I've heard of him, and I'm sure he could have quite a few stories to tell himself.
He did, but it was one specific thing that he told me, and I never even paid attention to it. He said that I just assumed, okay, demonic possession, that would be what we're talking about. That's what would require an exorcism. And he said there's actually 3 kinds of demonic influence, with possession being really the most severe kind requiring exorcism. But he said the first 2 are oppression and obsession. And he said, like you mentioned, addictions and things that are going on in your life that people chalk up to bad luck really is a form of demonic influence. And I never put 2 and 2 together. So I think a lot of more people are actually being influenced demonically than they really know.
That's why I'm so busy these days. That's why I'm in demand, because people are suffering, and they're suffering more and more. And when people hear me, in these interviews, and everything you just said is absolutely the truth, when people hear that, then they come to an understanding and say, wow, I didn't realize it until I listened to you. And then I started to put 2 and 2 together. And so, next thing you know, I'm being contacted by somebody for help, and then I'm on a plane. I travel all over this country every week. I've helped people in 40 different countries around this world. That is by the power of God. It is amazing. And so to come from where I come from, being in the lowest of lows and suffering unimaginable horrors, to where I'm at now, and being a powerful warrior for God and having him to work through me in this way is nothing short of a miracle.
And again, if it wasn't for the trials and tribulations God had you suffer, that wouldn't have shaped who you are today to become the helpful person that you are. And this goes back to what we were talking about, how he shaped our lives, but clearly for you in a much more helpful manner to people, where I'm just sharing information. You're actually hands-on, literally delivering people from the worst kind of hell they could be living through. And I'm sure that you've come across people before they've even asked for help. They probably didn't even know what was really going on, did they?
That's true. That's absolutely true. And it's amazing because I have had experiences to where I would be walking through an airport and someone would stop me, and then they tell me what's going on with them, and God has worked through me to help them. I have been on airplanes, and people have any place. I mean, I've been in so many different mundane, everyday type of places where people would approach me, and God would work through me to help them. It's just truly miraculous. It's incredible, and it's the greatest feeling in the world to know what your purpose is and your calling. And I'm forever grateful to God for working through me in this way to help others. And you do very valuable work as well, whether you know it or not, because without you reporting these things, then nobody would know. Without you and others, I've given over 2,000 media interviews worldwide over the years. Without you and others like you, nobody would know who I am or what I do. So, you have a very important role in this as well.
Well, thank you. I do appreciate that. And I hope we can help people recognize that they're first two things, the people that don't understand what's happening, that they might recognize, well, hold on, these events in my life aren't just bad luck or bad circumstances, that something is happening. And two, the people who do recognize that there's some sort of influence, possibly as severe as possession of them or where they live, that finally stopped being scared and reach out. That would be what I do hope. When you were 13 years old and you finally got the courage and stopped feeding them fear and you got enraged and started calling out these demons, can you talk about the difference of what happens when you call them out versus what you're doing now, which is casting them out?
Yeah, and I failed to say also that my Uncle Clifford played a big role in that. Prior to that event taking place in 1979, my brother and I had visited Florida, and I must say, and I'm sorry to say about, what I'm about to say, is that I very much hated my father during this period of time. I hated him for what he had done to my mother and for all the destruction and how, he allowed the devil to work through him just to pave this road of utter chaos and destruction. So for many years, I hated him. I loathed him. And yet, I ended up going with my brother to Florida to see him, and I really didn't want to see him. And I went there just more so to be there for my brother, my younger brother. And it was during that visit, and it's amazing how God works. It was during that visit that I had a very deep discussion with my uncle, my father's older brother. When my father had left us, he had gone to Florida, and he was working for my uncle, who was also a contractor, and a very devout Christian. And so we had a very deep discussion about faith, which my family, we were not faith-based. My parents believed in God, but we had never attended church. We were never baptized, anything like that. So this was really all new coming to me from my uncle, and he explained to me that we could take power and authority over these things by the mighty power of God in Jesus' name. So that's where it came in. Now, it totally didn't sink into me. I guess I didn't retain it enough that when really, and I think that, again, this was God preparing me for this situation to see if I could be that warrior, that he would work through to help people. So I think that was certainly a preview of things to come. But where I made the mistake was, and I guess it was being under duress, is that I didn't remember exactly what my uncle had said about binding and casting them out. So instead of taking power and authority over them and binding them and casting them out, I was calling them out. There's a big difference there. So if you're calling them out, believe me, they're going to come out.
But they're going to stay,
what
right?
You want to do. Yeah, you want to bind and rebuke them and cast them out. So now in my work, not only do I bind and rebuke and cast them out, I ask God, Yahweh, his name is listed 6,823 times in the Bible and replaced by the title of Lord. So wherever you see Lord in caps, that should say Yahweh. But anyway, that's another story, another show. But when we're taking power and authority over these things, I ask God to send his giant warrior angels to take them into custody and carry them off and deposit them back into the pits of hell where they belong. So we have to be very careful when doing these types of things, because if a person is binding and casting out, sometimes those demons could go into other people or into other homes or whatever. So you have to be very, very careful. So that's why I call in Yahweh's angels to come and take these things into custody and carry them off so they can't go into somebody else or go into a home or something like that.
When you say Yahweh in front of these demons, I would assume they react just at that name, right?
Well, it's full submission. And I don't say that in a bragging way because, again, it's not my power. It's God's power working through me. But the moment that happens, I say, by the mighty power of Yahweh and his mighty and holy name in Jesus' name, I bind and rebuke you and command you to loose this person or depart, whatever it is. Then I'm asking his angels to come and take these things and carry them off. So they're in full submission at that point in time. Now, I have had situations to where I've had to say it many times. For two people are coming to mind now that were fully possessed, and they were two of the most intense cases that I've had to date. And so it was a real spiritual battle going on there, and it would beat them down for a second, and it would come back because there was so many of them inside of each one of these victims that I'm thinking about. So it took a little bit of time, But in the end, every last one of them were bound and cast out, and God's angels did carry them off and deposit them back into the pits of hell where they belong. So sometimes, I'll say in 90% of the cases, there's not much opposition from the demons because they just cannot withstand the power of God. But there are the rare occasions to where there are so many demons embedded in certain people that it is a process of elimination and binding and rebuking and casting out one after the other.
When you actually go to an exorcism to cast these demons out, what do you bring? Holy water, your Bible, any other tools, or just the power of God with the holy water?
Well, the power of God, number one. If I didn't take anything, it would be my faith and the power of God that is on me and within me. So that's number one. Secondly, yes, I do have my Bible. I have a Bible that you should see. I'll have to send you a picture. It's 20 years old, and it is falling apart, but I just can't part with it. So that travels with me everywhere I go, all over the country. And I do use a mix of holy water, holy oil, and holy salt. So first thing I do is when I arrive at a residence, and sometimes businesses have called me in as well. So when I arrive at the place of a client, the first thing I do is I say a lamb blessing, and I ask God to bless, heal, and cleanse and forgive any wickedness or bloodshed or murder or anything of the like that may have taken place on the land in the history of the land. And then I ask God to send 30 of his giant warrior angels to come and carry off any demons that may be present in, on, or around the land, the home, or the family, or the pets. So that's the first thing that I do. I say the land blessing and anoint the land. And then I go in and I will anoint the heads of everyone present. And then I will say several prayers at the front door, including a house blessing prayer. And then we sit down and I have to become a counselor. And I already have some knowledge of what's going on because my assistant Melinda, so for instance, if people are hearing this now and they're contacting me after the show or whatever it is, I won't directly get back to them, but my assistant Melinda will get back to them. And then it's her job to talk with them and then get the basic information of what's taking place, that she relays that to me, and then I do get back to them, and then we, book the appointment, and I'm on a plane somewhere or flying wherever these people are. That's how it works. And so once I get in there, I have to sit down and become a counselor. Now, I already know some information, but I have to dig deeper than that because demons deal in legalities, so they deal in legal rights. And if they feel they have a legal right to be there, God will allow it because of free will. So I have to sit there, and it's not that I want to know people's deep and dark secrets. I have to know it in order to get to the root of the problem, and then I can engage whatever's taking place, whatever the stronghold is, in spiritual warfare. And then God works through me to take this.
Well, let's talk about, I'll get into some of the most severe cases in a bit. Let's talk about the people who are being oppressed and obsessed that have that kind of influence. What can they do now to prevent from having worse demonic influence that would turn into possession, where really they are definitely not in control of their lives, as if they're not already from being obsessed or oppressed?
Well, if a person is currently obsessed or oppressed or cursed, because curses are very real as well, and I deal with a lot of people that have had voodoo curses on them, Santeria curses, et cetera, anything that you can imagine. I've been there and I've dealt with it, God working through me. And so if anyone is in that type of state currently, they need help right away. This isn't just going to go away. So what they need to do is reach out to someone like me for help. That's step one. Then, once me or whomever, whatever agent of God arrives, and God works through to take all these things, then it's my job to sit down as a life coach after that, and we have to formulate a game plan for this person's life or person's life moving forward. So when a person is under this type of attack and torment, they're in a fear-based, trauma-based way of thinking and living. I was there myself for many, many years, and it was like a dark cloud was over my head. Nothing would ever go right. And when a person is on that type of low frequency, low vibration, that's right where the devil is. That's right where he wants you to be. So there's always a problem. There's always a situation. There's always a drama, and there is never an answer. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. So after going to someone like that, and after God working through me to free a person like that, then it's my job to sit down and outline a new way of thinking, a new way of living, and even if that means eliminating some things out of the home, because there are cursed objects, and Scripture tells us, do not bring a cursed object into your home lest you be cursed like it. So we have to be very mindful of what we are bringing into our homes or what we're having on our person. That in itself could be a doorway for a person to come under this kind of attack. So I have to be very thorough in examining, what is going on in the person's life, and then we make the changes there accordingly. And so literally, by the power of God, it is my job to transform this person from being on low frequency, low vibration in the fear-based, trauma-based way of thinking and living into what I call warrior mode, which is faith, strength, and courage. So when we operate in warrior mode, which is high frequency, high vibration, we eliminate the fear. And if we eliminate the fear, then we are kicking the devil right in the teeth out of our life. And that's what God did for me. And it was my job as well to have this type of mindset change. And once I got there, I've never looked back. It's almost like it happened to somebody else, Dr. J, to be honest with you. I'm that far removed from it. It's like it happened to somebody else. And that's why you hear me over and over and over again, thanking God and praising God for this. And it's true. I mean, I can never thank him and praise him enough. So my life is 50 times more blessed than it's ever been cursed. And I'm so grateful and thankful. And I wrote a book. My third book was called 10 Steps to Victory. And in 10 Steps to Victory, which I put in the fourth book as well, called The Connection, it was worth repeating. I have to get people in the mindset of living their life in this way. And this is how I live my life. Step one, I make God first. Step two, I follow the path of Jesus. Step three, it's about building your faith. So if you're walking in that really solid, rock-solid faith and you have that strong connection with God, then we know that if God's with us and for us, nothing's going to stand against us. Step four is learning forgiveness. It's very important to forgive. And I told you earlier in the interview that I had great hatred towards my father. I was very thankful to be able to forgive him after the death of my mother. And it wasn't long after we moved out of that house that two tragedies occurred. My beloved mother, Patricia Bean, died at the age of 44 from a cerebral hemorrhage. And that was 2 months and 2 days after my beloved grandmother, Dora Harvey, my mother's mother, died from a sudden series of heart attacks. And these two ladies were the closest people to me in my life. It was devastating beyond belief to lose them. But then years later, not too many years later, my father, William Bean, was shot to death at the age of 48. So, and other family members as well died tragically and horrifically also. So it's there's been a lot of loss, and I was thankful, Dr. J, that I was able to forgive my dad before his untimely death. So again, Jesus said this many times, forgiveness is as much for us as it is for the person that we're forgiving, because when we hold these terrible feelings, this hatred, and harbor these grudges, it is a spiritual poisoning, and we truly can't move forward in life until we let those types of things go. And step 5 is finding your purpose in life, and we discussed that, and we both have found our purpose, and we praise God for it. Step 6 is the power of positive thinking. So we have to trade that negative way of thinking and living in on believing, and that's where faith comes in. I mean, I can recall back even, when I was past those days of being out of the house, and then growing into coming into my young adult years, my life was still a wreck, and I can recall waking up some days declaring that the day was going to suck or it was going to be horrible or whatever, and guess what? It was, because I invoked it. There really is something to the power of the spoken word, and it goes right back to God speaking the world into existence. And when he created us, he left a little piece of himself inside of us, so we too have powers, the power of God that is within us. So we can speak things into existence, and we have to be very mindful of that. So once we change our thinking around into the power of positive thinking, we can speak good and positive things into existence. And so step 7 is setting goals. It's very important to set goals in life. Step 8 is giving. It is, for me, I'd much rather give to somebody than to receive anytime. I get such great joy out of giving and helping people. So it's very important. And then step 9 is being grateful for everything, which I am totally grateful to God and to many people for their help along the way. And then step 10 is being in that warrior mode, which I call, again, faith, strength, and courage. And when we're in that type of really rock-solid faith, strength, and courage, that is in the order of David. And that's why God had such great favor on David, because David operated in that faith, strength, and courage. So it's very basic, very simple, but very effective.
Setting goals is a key thing. And like you said, after you work with someone, you continue to work with them as a life coach and teach people to be grateful. Like you said, forgiveness is not just for us, but for the people being forgiven. And I've always believed that, because like you said, not only is something lifted off our shoulders, it's also lifted off them as well. And of course, being in a warrior mode, you need to be, which actually goes to something that I wanted to ask you a while ago. When we talked about them feeding off of fear, it's not just fear, is it? It's also other negative emotions such as hate, resentment, sadness, and other things like that too, isn't it?
Absolutely correct. Yeah. So when the negative is dominant, bad things are going to happen, because these demonic forces, again, the devil and his demonic minions, are going to have a smorgasbord off of it. So that's why it is so important. And Jesus said this many, many times, that we're to love one another. And so love is the greatest tool that God ever gave us to combat evil. So it is very important that and look, we're never going to be in total agreement with each other. We have more division in our country now than probably ever before. And it is what it is, but we really should all take a step back and say, look, let's start a movement of loving one another, working together, trying to strive for what is good and right. And let's just, we're in this thing together. Let's try and work together as children of God to do the best that we can do and be the best that we could be. And if we could suddenly adapt and adopt that type of philosophy, then things would change overnight.
Another thing I wanted to ask you about is prisons and prisoners, people who commit heinous acts like killing people. Or I've always wondered, do these people just really lack that basic part of humanity that says, hey, this is bad, or snuffing out a life is bad? And so I always wondered if these people missing something in their brain, or are they that influenced by demons or possessed that's probably what's guiding them. So I guess my question would be is, have you worked with people in prisons or prisoners or murderers or anybody who's committed such heinous acts against humanity?
I sure have, and I've also worked with soldiers who return from war and things of that nature as well. So it's very, very difficult. And yes, some of these people, especially these hardcore prisoners that have committed, so many wicked and heinous acts, including murders and other things, they're demon-filled. And it is not until the person realizes it and wants to be free from it, I mean sincerely, because you're not going to con God. That's not going to happen. So, you can give the lip service all day long that you're this and you're that, and you do this and do that. But if you really don't, then you're not conning God. That's for sure. You're lying to yourself. But if a person who has, committed atrocities is really sincere and remorseful and now convicted in their spirit, then I do believe that they could get on their knees and cry out for God, and God would forgive them. And so it's a very fine line, because a lot of these people are not remorseful. They don't care. Have you ever heard the term bad seed?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Well, what that means is that they are part of the satanic seed line. And this is another thing where I'd be thrown out of some churches if I talked about this, but it's absolutely the truth, and it's biblical as well. If you go back to Genesis 3, 13 through 15, where God calls Adam, Eve, and the serpent together, and he says, what have you done? And because you've done this with the woman, I will now create enmity, which means hatred between you and the woman, and I'll create enmity, hatred between your seed and the woman's seed. So he's saying it right there that the devil has a seed. And I believe that the first seed of the devil was Cain, and that's why he slew his brother Abel. So Abel was the seed of Adam, and the devil's seed was Cain, because Eve did a lot more in the garden than eating a piece of fruit. And so that's where it really originates from. And so there's always been a demonic seed line on this planet. That's why God caused the great flood, to try and rid the planet of them. And this will be for another show, because I know we're running out of time, but I do believe that some of these demonic seed line entities, call them Nephilim or whatever you want to call, literally escaped our planet. And I believe they escaped our planet in flying craft, UFOs. And I think they went to places like Mars until the floodwaters calmed down and receded. And then they came back and continued the seed line. So I do believe that some of these people, which are mentioned as the terrors in the Bible, are just that. They're part of the demonic satanic seed line. Therefore, they lack remorse. They lack compassion. They don't have a heart or care about anyone or anything. So they have the innate ability to be these killing machines and continue to do so without remorse.
Like you said, we are going to do more in another show. As a matter of fact, I need you back for a full 2 hours. And after my next question, I want to talk about your book and when that will be. But this is because of the fact that we're on Halloween today. And I asked this of Dr. Taft before he got off the last hour. So I'm just going to ask you this. Of all the cases you've worked on, because it's Halloween, can you pick one case that would probably be one of the scariest, most bizarre, not to frighten people as in a bad way, but to tell people that this case is really what would happen if you had such demonic influence that, like your case, that would have been something that I would have put as very, very severe. But since we talked about that, if you could tell one more story that somebody that you worked with and delivered, which one would you choose? And I know that it's probably like picking through children because there's so many.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're right. And, I have to say that there was a case of demonic possession in my own family, and I wrote about that in my second book called Delivered. And I won't go into it right now, but I'll say the most severe case as a deliverance minister, spiritual warrior, took place last October 27th. And in a place in Pennsylvania. And this was an upper middle class family, very good people. And unfortunately, it was a husband and wife, and the wife had suffered atrocities beyond belief as a child. I'll just leave it at that. But through these atrocities that she suffered, she had a demonic attachment with her for many, many years. And it wasn't until one of the abusers died and a piece of jewelry came to her from one of these abusers, and she brought it into her home and she actually put it on. That's when the full demonic attack and possession began to manifest. And so, how can I say this without saying too much? I try to keep confidentiality.
No, and I respect that because Father Ashcroft did exactly the same thing because this is very private for people who are experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say this, that, she began to physically attack her husband and others. And when these demonic forces take over, superhuman strength is involved.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that, and it's very scary. I couldn't even, thankfully, knock on wood, I'm always worried that that's something I'll come across. Unfortunately, I think we've been blessed in the home and the people I've been around to have not seen. I know I've come across people who are suffering from oppression and obsession, but I have yet to come across someone that I personally know or through association would have known about them and have been in their presence to see something of possession and to experience things you have of seeing like superhuman strength and different things like that. That would just really shake me to my core.
Well, I was called in on this thing, and then, I arrived, and it was probably, I guess, 4:45 p.m. It was, the sun was starting to dim, and evening was coming, and the husband opens the door, very, very nice home, nice neighborhood, and he opens the door, and his wife is probably 20 feet away from him, behind him, in the living room, and she hissed at me when he opened the door. And just imagine that for a second. And so now, my job as a spiritual warrior, man of God, I can't retreat. So I just advanced right in. So he opens the door, she hisses, I advance in. Now, normally I go through what I told you earlier. I have a routine of how I go about things, starting by blessing the land. Well, that routine was out the window now because he's opened the door and this woman's hissing at me. So everything was out the window at that point, and I advanced in, and she starts retreating as I'm advancing, and another voice is coming out of her saying, "She's ours, you can't have her," and hurling all of these, terrible, foul, filthy things at me, explicatives. And so as she's retreating, now she's retreating into the dining room, I'm advancing. She had a glass, it looked like a chalice. It was in her left hand, and it was, I believe, red at the top, clear at the bottom, and there was a picture inside of it of one of the abusers. And so again, she's retreating, and I finally back her into the corner, in one of the corners in the dining room, and then she came out and charged at me and swung and tried to hit me with that glass, and I blocked it. And I had to engage her in physical warfare now, and thank God that I'm blessed with the ability to have a background in combat and hand-to-hand combat, and I'm thankful to God for that. So my objective now is to subdue her. I'm certainly not trying to hurt her in any way at all, but I had to subdue her, and I literally had to take her down, and now the husband's terrified. He was a military man. He'd never seen anything like this in his life. And so now I have to subdue her physically while performing this deliverance over her, this exorcism. And I mean, this was certainly the most volatile and intense thing. And I mean, she was trying to bite me. She spit on me. Literally, I mean, she was just inches away from sinking her teeth into my hands and arms and everything. I mean, this was just off the charts. And so the physical struggle took place for about 25 minutes on the ground. And then they, I guess, were worn down to the point by the power of God that they left her. And I knew the battle wasn't over. And my objective and my plan from there was to get her up, to get her into the bathroom, and get her under the shower to start a form of a baptism, and because I knew there were many demons in this woman. The voices had already manifested, so I knew, how severe this was. So I get her up, she's crying, and I get her into the bathroom, and as soon as I get her near the water, because when I turn on the water, then I got to bless it. So after I'm saying, by the mighty power of Yahweh, in Jesus' name, I declare this water to be blessed, sealed, sanctified, purified, cleansed, and made holy by the power of God, then I got to get her in there. And so as I start to get her in there, it starts all over again. These demons manifest again. Now I'm in another physical struggle with her. And I literally, and this is a very large woman, and she was powerful anyway from these demons being inside of her. And so I literally had to really, really struggle. And thank God, again, I'm a big man, I'm 6'3", 250 pounds, and I used to be a power lifter. So God has blessed me with, physical strength and then spiritual power, and I praise him for it. So I had to, really struggle with her to get her into that shower. And I'm binding and rebuking and casting out and asking God's angels to take these demons. And it was just one after the other, one voice after the other. So you'd get rid of one and another one would manifest. It was just, you would have had to have been there to truly grasp what I'm saying to you. And so then the last part of this is to get her out of that shower and into the large soaker tub, which is about 10, 15 feet away. And so I knew that if I could get her into the tub and finish the baptism by fully immersing her in that water, I knew that she would be free. But it was easier said than done, and it was a fight every step of the way. So now, I'm getting her out of there and physically struggling with her to get her into this soaker tub, and finally able to get her in there. I get her husband to come in. He runs the water. So, again, he was terrified. He'd never experienced anything like this. And so he left the room after that. And then it was a whole other process of binding and casting out even more demons that were coming out of this woman, and all of these different voices manifesting. And her tongue was like a serpent, just going all over the place. And I've seen this before with other people as well. It's something that I wouldn't wish on anybody. It's something that not just anybody can do. There's no way I could ever do this without the power of God working through me to do it. Because once a person shows fear, so if a man in my position goes in and is at this level of spiritual battle and physical battle as well, and if that man shows fear, he's finished. He's finished, and the people that he's trying to help are finished. It's over with. And so it is my job as the agent for God to be in control and to be in total faith, strength, and courage. I can't be anything other than. And so as this battle went on, the last part of it was to get her into that soaker tub, which I did, and then, probably cast out another 15 demons while she was in there. And then finally was able to get her. And at one point, I'm saying her name, too. I said, I know you hear me. I know you're in there. God's doing his part. I'm doing my part. I need you to do your part now, because I know you want to be free from all this. And the more I said that, you could feel the demonic stronghold weakening over her. So it was amazing, Dr. J, to say the least, and it was certainly the greatest part was finally getting her baptized and getting her under that water. And once I got her back up, she was totally free. She began to cry. And you can see literally when these demonic forces let go of a person, because just imagine somebody grabbing you by your collar and they have you up against a wall and you're like on your tiptoes. They're grabbing your collar and you're really jacked up against the wall. It's the same thing. And when they let go, you just slump. And so that's what happened. She slumped and began to cry, and her life changed right there. And I'm so happy for her. She's doing great now. Her and her husband are wonderful people. And I'm so thankful to God for working through me to help them. So, yes, it's right up there at the top of the list of, some of the worst, if not the worst, demonic possession that I've ever seen. And really, there was elation for me and exhaustion as well after it was all over with.
And I'm glad you were able to really help her, because like you said, from the details you said, this was a very, very, very severe case. And I know we will talk about more cases when you come back. So let me spend this last moment talking about where people can get a hold of you, where they can find your 4 books, and talk about your 5th book that's coming out and when the release date is.
Okay, and I want to thank you for having me on again. I've really enjoyed it. I look forward to coming back on the next time.
Absolutely, and, yes.
For anyone out there, number one, who needs help, if you're in a bad way and you feel like you're having any of these types of things or cursed or whatever it may be, don't hesitate to contact me. I'm a busy man, but I'm never too busy to help somebody. So just reach out to me at billbean.net. www.billbean.net, or you can punch me into Google. You'll get the phone book, and I will respond to you, or my assistant Melinda will get back to you in a very short amount of time, and I'll certainly do anything I can to help you. It's very important that you understand that you can't just sweep this under the rug and try and move forward. It doesn't work that way. You have to have this stuff literally bound and cast out and off and away from you. So, and if you'd like to get copies of my books, they're available there. As a matter of fact, the 10 Steps to Victory book, which is my 3rd book, is now an audio book, and it's free. So you can go on the site and click on it and get the free audio version. It's my little way of giving back because God has blessed me and given so much to me that I try to do anything I can to give back. So, and then I'm excited about this new book that's coming. First of all, I'm elated about the current book that I have, which is called The Connection. That book actually went to #1 on Amazon for a short time back in March, and it has had tremendous response, and I'm very, very thankful for it. The book starts out as a compilation of, the bad things that had happened to me, but by mid-book, it becomes triumphant and an instruction manual for people on how they can make their connection with God very, very strong. So I'm very happy about that book, and it's done well. And again, you can get a copy at billbean.net. But the book that is coming is it's called Stranger Than Fiction. And I am very excited about this book as well. It's a little different from the other books because the other books, are pretty much just personal accounts. I do have some personal accounts in this book, but I've also included others with their personal accounts. So we have, chapters on angels and demons and ghosts and UFOs and Bigfoot and Mothman and CERN and the Mandela Effect and things of that nature. And I think that it's going to be a very good and a very powerful book. So I'll be happy to have it out. Looks like it's going to be out sometime next month or before December 1st. And same thing, you'll be able to get copies at billbean.net.
And like I said, we definitely will have you back. And I'm glad you brought up the Mandela Effect. A lot of people have been talking about that. I looked into it, but we have yet to actually talk about that in the 5.5 years.
Well, we'll have to get
6.
into that the next time.
Yeah, that, and of course I want to continue with your work because you're actually helping people, and I think that's such a major thing. And I want to thank you, Bill, for what you're doing because we need more people like you. And I know we're over, so I'm going to make this as quick as I can. But one thing that Father Ashcraft did say, because he was the first person I talked to who was involved in exorcism, and now unfortunately I have you as well. He did say that in the last 25 years or so, the demand has skyrocketed to the point that more priests are being trained in this field, whereas before it was very few people. And so again, I have to thank you for your work, and I know all those countless of people you've helped through your whole life are indebted to you for being you and for helping. So again, I want to thank you for the show. Please hang on real quick so I could thank you off air as well. Let me just make some announcement real quick. I know we cover a lot of topics on the show. Some people don't necessarily like the politics too much, but because the elections are coming Monday and Tuesday, although Tuesday, one of the guests is a former CIA interrogator, but the other guests, both for Monday and the second hour of tomorrow and the second hour of Tuesday, election night, are going to be focusing on that. So again, bear in mind, don't think that this show is just completely changed because you all can see that there are going to be several other topics. A couple of people I want to thank. I do want to thank Adam of Adderike Studios for doing a lot of work behind the scenes and also being my #1 moderator in YouTube, which is something I want to thank. Pam Vrettenberg, someone who's helped with social media to the extent that she could, and I want to plug in her website, UnitedTruthSeekers.com. Again, UnitedTruthSeekers.com, and soon there will be also a link on my site for that, and as well as Joel Skousen's. Don't forget about the worldaffairsbrief.com, that banner will also be up. He is the InfoWars World Affairs expert who has also agreed to be our World Affairs expert, coming on at least once a month on this show. As you notice, we got more people from Fox News and InfoWars, and so the whole point is to be talking about what you all people want to talk about. I do want to thank Katie and Daryl Neely, the station managers of Late Night in the Midlands, as well as the audio engineers for the show, for their very hard work taking the station to where it is, as opposed to what I've seen it happen over the years. So we are blessed to have them working behind the scenes. I also want to thank Michael Vara, the station owner of Late Night in the Midlands, and in the UK we have JC of Deprogram Radio Network. I do want to thank him for the syndication of the show. The final thing, folks, I want to remind you, which I do every single show, again, the only thing you need to remember about the show is the name of it, Dr. J Radio Live. That is DRJ Radio Live. For instance, the website, drjradiolive.com. every single social media account at DRJ Radio Live, from Minds. And if you guys don't have a minds.com yet, I highly recommend you opening it. It's the only social media that is open source, that is not like Facebook where they'll boot out people like Roger Stone and InfoWars. It's not censored, and it pays you in cryptocurrency just for doing what you normally do. It's a combination of Facebook, Google Plus, and Twitter all at the same time. So Minds, Facebook, Patreon, Instagram, Twitter, Flickr, Tumblr, Google Plus, Gmail, Buffer, anything you could think of, even Pinterest. Again, folks, at DRJ Radio Live. I make it very simple for you to find me. So again, remember to join us tomorrow for another 2 hours with a 2-guest show, and that'll be the same for Monday and Tuesday because of the elections. When it comes to politics, I usually try to keep the guests at 1 hour as opposed to 2, but because sometimes it doesn't necessarily fit to have a topic on politics and then switch to something else, I try to keep them to a line. So again, like I said, because these are back-to-back shows, bear with me since I usually try to keep them at least 1 or 2 weeks apart. Well, with that being said, folks, I do wish you all a happy Halloween. For those of you on the East Coast, it's a little after 9. I hope you enjoyed trick-or-treating with your kids, or if you guys are actually doing that, then again, I hope you enjoyed it. For those on the West Coast, I do hope you are just now getting out there since the sun has officially gone down in California. And also for those of you in the UK, EU, Halloween doesn't apply to you. So all I have to say is you all have a good morning and a good day as you join us back tonight or tomorrow night, tonight for you in the UK and EU. Tomorrow night, same place, same time, 7 p.m. Eastern and midnight GMT. So with that being said, folks, this is Dr. J, and I am officially signing off.